The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on the bridge of the UES Defiance. Admiral Jake Morrison stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the viewport that showed nothing but endless space. His ship was humanity's pride, the first vessel capable of faster-than-light travel. But right now it felt very small against the universe. "Admiral, we're getting something on long-range sensors," called out Lieutenant Commander Ben Cross from his position at the sensor station. His voice carried that particular tension that came with detecting the unknown in deep space. Morrison moved to look over Cross's shoulder at the display. The readings showed massive objects moving at the edge of the solar system, far larger than any human vessel ever built. "How many contacts?" 17 confirmed, sir. Possibly more behind them. "They're huge, Admiral. Each one is at least 3 times the size of our biggest battleship." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. Morrison had known this day might come eventually. Humanity had always wondered if they were alone in the universe, and now they had their answer. The question was whether first contact would be peaceful or hostile. "Communications, try to establish contact. Use all frequencies, all protocols we've developed for this scenario," Morrison ordered. Captain Lisa Brooks, the ship's xenobiologist and first contact specialist, moved to the communication station. She had spent years preparing for this moment, studying every theory about alien contact that human scientists had developed. Her hands shook slightly as she activated the transmission systems. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Lisa Brooks of the Earth vessel UES Defiance. We come in peace and wish to establish communication. Please respond on any frequency." The response came faster than anyone expected. The main view screen flickered to life, showing a figure that was definitely not human. The being had 4 arms, skin that looked like polished metal, and eyes that glowed with a cold blue light. When it spoke, the words came through the translation software in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "Primitive species of the 3rd planet. I am Field Marshal Zethkar of the Korvathian hegemony. Your presence in this system has been noted and evaluated. You will surrender immediately and accept integration into the hegemony, or face complete annihilation." Brooks stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady. "Field Marshal, we seek peaceful relations. Surely we can discuss this without threats of violence." The alien's expression, if it could be called an expression, showed what might have been amusement. "Discussion is not required. Our analysis of your species is complete. You possess primitive technology, disorganized military structures, and emotional instability that makes you unsuitable for independence. You have 72 of your planet's rotational periods to comply." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Morrison felt his jaw clench as he processed what had just happened. Humanity's first contact with alien life had lasted less than 5 minutes, and they had already been dismissed as primitives and given an ultimatum. "Get me General Paul Hayes on Earth immediately," Morrison ordered. "Priority Alpha communication." Within minutes, the weathered face of Earth's top military strategist appeared on a secure channel. Hayes had spent 40 years in the military, rising through every branch of service, and his reputation for tactical thinking was legendary among human forces. "I saw the transmission, Jake," Hayes said without preamble. "How bad is it?" Morrison gestured to Cross, who transmitted the sensor data to Earth. 17 confirmed vessels, General. Each one outmasses our entire fleet. Their technology appears to be centuries ahead of ours, maybe more." Hayes studied the data for a long moment. "What's your assessment of their military doctrine?" "Unknown, sir. But based on their approach formation and the way they presented their ultimatum, they seem to favor direct confrontation and overwhelming force." "Very formal, very structured." "Interesting," Hayes mused. "Lisa, what did you make of their leader?" Brooks had been reviewing the alien's words and behavior. "He seemed completely confident, General. Not arrogant exactly, but like someone who has never encountered a situation they couldn't handle through superior firepower. The way he dismissed us suggests they've done this many times before." "That could be our advantage," Hayes said slowly. "Jake, I'm transmitting new orders to all fleet commanders. We're implementing Protocol Omega." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. Protocol Omega was theoretical. A last resort strategy developed for fighting an enemy with overwhelming technological superiority. It abandoned all conventional military doctrine in favor of what the textbooks called asymmetric warfare. "General, are you sure? Protocol Omega assumes we can't win through normal combat." "Look at those sensor readings, Admiral. Can we win through normal combat?" Morrison stared at the display showing the massive alien fleet. Each enemy vessel could probably destroy every human ship in the solar system single-handedly. No, sir, we cannot. Then we don't fight normally. Lisa, I need you to start broadcasting on all frequencies. Make it look like we're panicking, like we're trying to evacuate civilians from Mars and the outer colonies. Jake, I want your ship to start falling back toward Mars, but make it look reluctant, like you're buying time for evacuations. Brooks looked confused. General, you want me to make us look weak and disorganized? Hayes smiled grimly. I want you to make us look exactly like what they think we are. Primitives who don't understand real warfare. Let them think they have us figured out. Over the next several hours, human forces throughout the solar system began implementing Hayes's orders. Ships moved in patterns that appeared chaotic and desperate. Communications filled with seemingly panicked messages about civilian evacuations and requests for more time. The Corvathian fleet observed all of this with growing confidence. Their long-range sensors detected human vessels scattering like frightened animals, and their analysis computers confirmed what Field Marshal Zethkar had already concluded. These humans were exactly what they appeared to be, an emotional, disorganized species that would crumble at the first sign of real opposition. What the aliens didn't detect were the subtle preparations happening throughout human space. Mining platforms in the asteroid belt were being quietly repositioned. Cargo ships were being loaded with very specific materials, and deep in hidden bunkers on Earth, teams of programmers and engineers were putting finishing touches on systems the Corvathians had never encountered before. Morrison stood on his bridge as the Defiance continued its apparent retreat toward Mars. His crew looked nervous, which was perfect because nervous was exactly what they were supposed to look like right now. But underneath the surface fear, he could see something else in their eyes. Determination. The aliens had made their first mistake when they assumed humans would fight like every other species they had conquered. They were about to discover that humans had spent their entire history fighting each other, and in that constant warfare, they had learned lessons about combat that a species accustomed to easy victory could never imagine. The 72-hour countdown had begun, and when it ended, the Corvathian hegemony would learn what it really meant to go to war with humanity. The 72 hours passed like a countdown to Judgment Day. When the timer reached 0, Field Marshal Zethkar gave the order his species had given countless times before to countless other worlds. The Corvathian fleet began its advance toward the inner solar system, moving in the precise formation that had brought victory after victory for 3,000 years. Admiral Morrison watched the enemy ships approach on his sensors. They moved like a perfect parade, each vessel in its exact position, maintaining proper distances and angles just as their military doctrine required. It was beautiful in its precision and absolutely predictable. All ships begin Phase 1 retreat, Morrison announced on the fleet communication channel. His voice carried just the right amount of reluctance and fear to sell the performance. Fall back to Mars' defensive perimeter. Buy as much time as possible for the civilian evacuations. The human fleet began what appeared to be a panicked withdrawal. Ships moved at different speeds, some vessels seeming to lag behind as if their engines were failing, others racing ahead as if their crews had lost their nerve. To the aliens watching through their advanced sensors, it looked exactly like the behavior of primitives who had finally realized they were outmatched. Commander Sam Mitchell piloted his cargo ship, Neptune's Pride, through what looked like a desperate run toward Mars. His vessel was one of dozens that had been hastily converted from civilian service, loaded with refugees and supplies. At least that was what the Corvathian sensors told them. In reality, Mitchell's ship carried no refugees at all. Instead, its cargo bays were packed with thousands of metallic chaff dispensers and automated signal beacons, each one programmed to mimic the electronic signature of a human warship. As his ship fled through space, it began releasing its cargo in carefully planned patterns. The chaff spread out behind the retreating human fleet like a glittering cloud of confusion. Each piece of metal reflected radar signals, creating false contacts on enemy sensors. The beacons added to the chaos by broadcasting fake identification codes and emergency signals, making it appear as if dozens more human ships were scattered throughout the area. Field Marshal Zethkar observed the retreat from his flagship with satisfaction. His analysis officers reported that human forces were scattering in all directions, their formations completely broken. Several human vessels appeared to be broadcasting distress signals, indicating engine failures or life support problems. Maintain pursuit formation. Zethkar ordered. These humans are exactly as predicted. No discipline, no coordination, no understanding of proper military structure. What the field marshal didn't notice was that the human retreat was following a very specific pattern. Every ship was moving along predetermined routes, drawing the alien fleet deeper into the solar system and away from the safety of open space. Colonel Amy Foster worked frantically at her station aboard a converted mining platform hidden among the asteroids. Her facility had spent the last 3 days preparing for this moment, using mining equipment to launch specially prepared packages along carefully calculated trajectories. The packages weren't bombs or missiles in any traditional sense. They were simple chunks of metal and rock, some no bigger than a person's fist, others the size of automobiles. But they had been accelerated to incredible speeds using the same mass drivers that normally launched processed ore to Earth's factories. Foster watched her targeting display as the alien fleet moved into the engagement zone. The Corvathians were so focused on pursuing the retreating humans that they paid no attention to what their sensors classified as ordinary space debris drifting through the area. Lieutenant Commander Ben Cross had separated from the main fleet in his stealth reconnaissance ship Shadow Walker. His vessel was humanity's most advanced spy craft, equipped with experimental cloaking systems and electronic warfare, suites that most of the fleet didn't even know existed. Cross had managed to intercept and decode Corvathian communication protocols during their initial contact. Now he was using that information to broadcast false sensor data directly into the enemy fleet's information network. To the aliens, it appeared that their sensors were simply malfunctioning slightly, showing minor inconsistencies that weren't worth investigating. Dr. Helen Murphy monitored her instruments from a research station hidden on the dark side of a small moon. Her team had spent months preparing for this moment, placing nuclear devices along the most likely approach routes to the inner solar system. But these weren't weapons designed to destroy enemy ships directly. Instead, the nuclear devices were configured to create massive electromagnetic pulses when detonated. The intense radiation would overwhelm electronic systems and disrupt the delicate sensors that modern spacecraft depended on for everything from navigation to weapons targeting. Murphy watched as the alien fleet moved into position. Their ships were marvels of advanced technology, with energy shields that could deflect any conventional weapon and sensors so precise they could track individual asteroids from millions of miles away. All of that advanced technology was about to become their greatest weakness. The Corvathian fleet continued its advance, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Their ships mounted weapons that could crack planets and armor that had never been penetrated by any known force. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, and each victory had followed the same pattern: overwhelming technological advantage leading to swift, decisive victory. Field Marshal Zethkar reviewed the tactical situation one final time. The human fleet was in full retreat, their formations scattered, their communications filled with panic. Everything was proceeding exactly as his analysis had predicted. In a few more hours, the primitive species of the third planet would be just another entry in the hegemony's records of conquest. What Zethkar couldn't see was the web of preparation that surrounded his fleet. Hidden among the asteroids, disguised as civilian evacuations, camouflaged as space debris, humanity's real response to the alien ultimatum was moving into position. Morrison stood on his bridge as the final elements of Phase 1 fell into place. His ship continued its apparent retreat, staying just ahead of the alien pursuit while leading them exactly where General Hayes wanted them to go. "Admiral, all units report ready for Phase 2. Cross reported from his hidden position near the enemy fleet. Morrison nodded grimly. The hardest part of the plan had been making it look like humanity was beaten before the real fight even began. Every instinct in his military training screamed against showing weakness to an enemy. But Hayes had been clear. The aliens had to believe they understood human capabilities completely. "Dr. Murphy, are your systems ready?" Morrison asked. "All charges are in position, Admiral. Waiting for your signal." Morrison looked at his tactical display one last time. The alien fleet was exactly where they needed to be, moving at exactly the right speed, focused entirely on what they believed was a helpless enemy in full retreat. "All units, this is Admiral Morrison. The trap is set. Prepare for Phase 2 on my mark." He paused, thinking of Earth behind them and the billions of people depending on what happened in the next few minutes. Show them what happens when you pick a fight with humanity. The moment Admiral Morrison gave the signal, space around the Corvathian fleet exploded into chaos. Dr. Murphy triggered her electromagnetic pulse devices simultaneously, creating massive waves of radiation that washed over the alien ships like an invisible tsunami. The effect was immediate and devastating. Every Corvathian vessel suddenly found their sensor displays flickering with static and false readings. Their advanced targeting computers, designed to track thousands of objects simultaneously with perfect precision, began showing error messages in languages that had been dead for centuries. Field Marshal Zethkar stared at his command display in confusion as warning lights began flashing throughout his flagship. "What is happening to our systems?" he demanded. His technical officer, a being with 6 arms and compound eyes, worked frantically at multiple control panels. "Sir, we are experiencing massive electromagnetic interference. Our primary sensors are offline. Backup systems are showing conflicting data." On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Morrison watched the enemy fleet's perfect formation begin to wobble and break apart. Ships that had maintained exact distances and angles for hours were now drifting slightly off course as their navigation computers struggled to function. Phase 3. "Execute now," Morrison ordered. Colonel Foster's kinetic projectiles, launched hours earlier from hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt, began reaching their targets. The chunks of metal and rock had been traveling through space at tremendous speeds, invisible to most sensors and dismissed as harmless debris by those that did detect them. The first impacts caught the Corvathians completely by surprise. A piece of iron the size of a small car struck the shield generator of a heavy cruiser, traveling at nearly 10% of light speed. The alien energy shields, designed to deflect plasma bolts and particle beams, offered no protection at all against simple solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The cruiser's shields collapsed as the kinetic projectile punched through its hull like a bullet through paper. Atmosphere vented into space as the ship began spinning out of control, its crew struggling with damage they had never been trained to handle. More impacts followed in rapid succession. The aliens watched in horror as their most advanced warships, vessels that had conquered entire star systems, were being destroyed by what appeared to be random pieces of space junk. Major Rick Taylor led his squadron of modified fighters through the chaff cloud that Commander Mitchell had deployed. The metallic particles created a perfect screen, hiding the human attack craft from enemy sensors, while the electromagnetic interference made it impossible for the aliens to target them effectively. Taylor's fighters had been stripped of all unnecessary equipment and loaded with improvised weapons that no military academy in the galaxy would recognize. Instead of sophisticated missiles or energy weapons, they carried simple explosive charges designed to attach to enemy hulls and detonate against critical systems. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy these ships," Taylor told his pilots as they approached their targets. "We want to blind them, confuse them, make them think we're everywhere at once." The human fighters split up and began attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. They moved in patterns that seemed completely random to the aliens, striking at communication arrays, sensor clusters, and weapons mounts before disappearing back into the chaff cloud. The Corvathians tried to respond with their standard defensive maneuvers, but their doctrine assumed they would be fighting an enemy that followed recognizable patterns. The human attacks came from impossible angles at unexpected times, targeting systems that no logical opponent would bother with. Commander Mitchell's cargo ship suddenly changed course and began broadcasting on all frequencies at maximum power. The transmission wasn't a military communication or a surrender offer. Instead, it was a recording of human music, specifically a piece called the 1812 Overture, complete with cannon fire and church bells. The alien communication networks, designed to handle precise military data, were overwhelmed by the chaotic noise. But the psychological effect was even worse than the technical disruption. The Corvathian crews, evolved from herd animals that relied on predictable social patterns, found the random sounds deeply disturbing. Other human ships began joining the broadcast, adding their own contributions to the cacophony. Battle cries in dozens of human languages mixed with music, poetry, and what the alien translators could only describe as aggressive celebration. The effect on enemy morale was devastating. Lieutenant Commander Cross, still hidden near the alien flagship, began the next phase of his mission. Using the communication codes he had captured, he started feeding false orders into the Corvathian command network. The messages were subtle at first, small changes to formation orders and targeting priorities that would seem like routine updates to busy commanders. Field Marshal Zethkar's fleet, already struggling with sensor failures and random attacks, began receiving conflicting orders from multiple sources. Some ships were told to advance while others were ordered to retreat. Wing commanders found themselves with targeting priorities that contradicted their mission objectives. Captain Nicole, Reed commanded a small group of human destroyers that had been hiding behind Mars throughout the initial engagement. Her ships emerged from their concealment and began attacking the alien fleet from a completely unexpected direction. Reed's vessels moved like nothing the Corvathians had ever seen in combat. Instead of maintaining formation and engaging in organized ship-to-ship duels, they scattered and attacked independently, each captain making decisions based on immediate tactical opportunities rather than overall strategy. The aliens tried to respond to this new threat, but every time they moved to engage Reed's ships, the humans would disappear behind debris or change course in ways that made no tactical sense. It was like trying to fight an enemy that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than rules. Dr. Murphy monitored the battle from her hidden station and began implementing the final element of Phase 3. Teams of human hackers, led by a civilian programmer named Tony Clark, had been working for weeks to understand Corvathian computer systems. Clark and his team had discovered that the alien networks were incredibly sophisticated, but also incredibly trusting. Security protocols designed to prevent external attacks were nearly non-existent because the hegemony had never encountered an enemy capable of electronic warfare. The human hackers began flooding the Corvathian systems with false data, corrupted targeting information, and fake damage reports. Ships that were perfectly functional began receiving warnings about critical system failures. Weapons that were fully operational showed empty ammunition stores on their status displays. Field Marshal Zethkar stood on his bridge surrounded by chaos. His perfectly organized fleet was falling apart, attacked by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. His ships were being destroyed by weapons that shouldn't exist, confused by tactics that made no sense, and betrayed by their own systems. For the first time in his long military career, the field marshal began to understand that he was fighting an enemy he didn't comprehend at all. The humans weren't just primitives with crude technology. They were something far more dangerous, an opponent that refused to follow any rules of warfare that the hegemony understood. The battle was far from over, but already the Corvathians were learning a lesson that would haunt them for generations. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with superior technology, but the one crazy enough to turn chaos itself into a weapon. The battle had been raging for 3 hours when Captain Steve Parker made the decision that would change everything. His destroyer, the UES Vigilant, had taken heavy damage from alien plasma fire and was venting atmosphere from multiple hull breaches. His main weapons were offline, his engines were failing, and his crew was down to half strength. Any reasonable military commander would have ordered retreat. Any sane person would have tried to save his ship and crew. But Parker wasn't thinking like a reasonable commander or a sane person. He was thinking like a human being who was angry, desperate, and absolutely determined not to let the aliens win. "All hands, this is the captain," Parker announced over the ship's communication system. "We've lost main power and weapons. Engineering reports we have maybe 10 minutes before life support fails completely." He paused, looking around at his bridge crew. "I'm setting course for the alien flagship. Anyone who wants to use the escape pods has 30 seconds to get out." Nobody moved. Lieutenant Sarah Kim at the helm looked back at her captain with a fierce smile. "Where do you want me to aim, sir?" Parker pointed at the massive Corvathian command ship on the tactical display. "Right at their bridge. Full speed, everything we've got left." The Vigilant turned toward the enemy flagship, its damaged engines pushing the ship faster than it had any right to go. Parker activated the general broadcast system, sending his message on every frequency his communication array could reach. "This is Captain Steve Parker of the Earth Destroyer Vigilant. My crew and I are from a little planet called Earth in a system you decided to attack today. We're Mike Anderson from Detroit, Lisa Chen from San Francisco, Danny Johnson from Dallas, and 37 other people who just wanted to live our lives in peace." His voice carried across space to both human and alien receivers. "You made this personal when you came to our home. This is for everyone on Earth who's counting on us." The Vigilant struck the alien flagship at tremendous speed, its hull crushing against the Corvathian shields like an egg hitting a wall. But the impact wasn't the weapon. The weapon was what it represented to both sides. Field Marshal Zethkar watched in horror as the human ship destroyed itself against his vessel's defenses. The attack accomplished nothing tactically. The flagship's shields held, the damage was minimal, and every human aboard the destroyer was killed instantly. But the psychological impact was devastating. The Corvathian crew, creatures evolved from herd animals that valued group survival above all else, could not understand why the humans would throw their lives away when escape was possible. The act violated every instinct they possessed about rational behavior. The human fleet, however, understood perfectly. Parker's sacrifice wasn't meaningless self-destruction. It was a message that said humans would rather die fighting than surrender to anyone, and that message spread through their forces like wildfire. Commander Sarah Lewis had been waiting behind Mars with what appeared to be a massive civilian evacuation fleet. Hundreds of cargo ships, passenger liners, and industrial vessels had been broadcasting distress signals and evacuation requests for the past several hours, creating the impression of a panicked retreat. The reality was very different. Lewis's civilian evacuation was actually the largest military deception in human history. The cargo ships were filled with volunteer fighters and improvised weapons. The passenger liners carried assault troops equipped for boarding actions. The industrial vessels had been converted into mobile weapons platforms. "All ships, this is Commander Lewis," she announced to her hidden fleet. "Captain Parker just showed these aliens what humans are willing to do for our freedom. Now let's show them what we're capable of when we fight together." The evacuation fleet suddenly changed course and began attacking the alien forces from every direction at once. Ships that had been broadcasting emergency calls minutes earlier were now launching fighters and firing improvised weapons at targets throughout the Corvathian formation. The aliens found themselves surrounded by enemies they hadn't even known existed. Every assumption they had made about human capabilities was proving wrong. The species they had dismissed as primitive was turning the entire solar system into a three-dimensional battlefield. General Paul Hayes coordinated the final phase of humanity's strategy from his command center deep beneath Earth's surface. His staff worked at dozens of stations, tracking the movements of hundreds of ships and thousands of individual weapons across millions of cubic miles of space. Phase 4 is now active, Hayes announced. All units implement Operation Chaos Theory. Dr. William Ross had spent the last week reverse engineering captured Corvathian technology with a team of Earth's best scientists and engineers. They had discovered that alien systems relied heavily on automated identification protocols that assumed all friendly vessels would broadcast specific recognition codes. Ross's breakthrough came when he realized that the Corvathian codes were generated by mathematical formulas rather than random sequences. Once his computers cracked the pattern, human ships could broadcast fake identification signals that made them appear as friendly vessels on enemy sensors. Lieutenant Commander Ben Cross had infiltrated deep into the alien fleet using one of these fake transponders. His stealth ship Shadow Walker appeared on Corvathian displays as a damaged friendly vessel requesting assistance, allowing him to move freely among enemy formations. Cross had been studying alien command structures and communication patterns for hours. He discovered that the Corvathians relied on a rigid hierarchy where orders flowed down from senior commanders to junior officers with very little independent decision-making at lower levels. "I've identified the key command ships," Cross reported to Admiral Morrison. "If we can eliminate their senior commanders, their entire fleet structure will collapse. These species can't function without clear leadership." Morrison smiled grimly as he received the targeting data. Human military doctrine emphasized individual initiative and independent thinking specifically, because rigid command structures were vulnerable to decapitation attacks. The coordinated assault began simultaneously across the alien fleet. Human forces that had been fighting seemingly random skirmishes suddenly focused their attacks on specific targets. Every Corvathian command ship found itself under assault from multiple directions by enemies that seemed to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. The alien commanders, already struggling with system failures and communication disruptions, began falling to precision attacks that targeted their bridges, command centers, and senior officer quarters. Each loss sent shockwaves through the rigid Corvathian hierarchy as junior officers found themselves without orders or clear chains of command. Captain Nicole, Reed led a squadron of human destroyers in a direct assault on the alien flagship. Her ships moved in perfect coordination, each vessel covering the others while they took turns making attack runs against the massive Corvathian command ship. Reed's tactics were based on patterns that predators used when hunting in packs, concepts that military theorists had studied for centuries but that the aliens had never encountered in space combat. The human ships worked together like wolves bringing down a much larger prey animal. Field Marshal Zethkar watched his fleet disintegrating around him as human forces continued their relentless attacks. His remaining commanders were reporting that their enemies seemed to anticipate every move, counter every strategy, and exploit every weakness with impossible precision. The truth was that humans had been studying the Corvathian fleet since the moment first contact occurred. Every transmission, every movement, every tactical decision had been recorded and analyzed by teams of military experts who understood that knowing your enemy was the key to victory. The aliens had made the fatal mistake of assuming that primitive technology meant primitive thinking. They were discovering that humans had spent thousands of years fighting each other, learning lessons about warfare that a species accustomed to easy victory could never imagine. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as he prepared to implement the final phase of humanity's defense plan. The battle had been raging for 6 hours, and the Corvathian fleet was in complete disarray. Half their ships were damaged or destroyed, their command structure was shattered, and their remaining forces were scattered across the solar system like leaves in a hurricane. All units, this is Admiral Morrison, he announced on the fleet-wide communication channel. Execute Operation Wildcard. Show them what happens when humans stop playing defense. Operation Wildcard was the culmination of everything humanity had learned about their enemy during the battle. Every piece of debris floating in space, every damaged ship still capable of movement, every weapon system that could still fire became part of a coordinated assault that would have been impossible for any other species to execute. Commander Sarah Lewis led the largest wave of the attack, bringing together ships from every branch of human space forces. Military vessels fought alongside converted cargo haulers, mining platforms, and even tourist ships that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons their crews could improvise. The human fleet moved like a living thing, each ship responding to the movements of others in patterns that seemed chaotic, but followed a logic that only humans could understand. Ships would suddenly change course to support vessels that were under attack, or break formation to exploit weaknesses that other species would never have noticed. The Corvathians tried to respond with their traditional tactics, but their rigid formations and predictable maneuvers made them easy targets for human forces that treated every rule of warfare as a suggestion rather than a law. Captain Nicole, Reed piloted her destroyer through a field of wreckage that had once been part of the alien fleet, hunting for the command ships that still coordinated enemy resistance. Her crew worked with the efficiency of people who knew their survival depended on their ability to think faster and fight harder than anything the galaxy had ever seen. Target identified, her weapons officer announced. Alien heavy cruiser, still broadcasting command signals. Reed studied the tactical display for a moment, noting the enemy ship's position relative to the debris field and the movements of nearby vessels. Plot an intercept course through that wreckage field. Use the debris as cover until we're in close range. Then hit them with everything we've got. The destroyer moved through the battlefield like a shark swimming through a school of fish, using every piece of cover and every moment of confusion to get closer to its prey. When Reed's ship finally opened fire, the alien cruiser was caught completely off guard by an attack that seemed to come from nowhere. Field Marshal Zethkar watched from his flagship as his fleet continued to disintegrate around him. His tactical officers were reporting losses at a rate that should have been impossible, and the humans seemed to be attacking from every direction at once with weapons that ranged from sophisticated energy cannons to simple chunks of metal hurled at incredible speeds. Sir, we're receiving communication requests from the enemy fleet, his communications officer reported. They appear to be offering terms for our surrender. Zethkar stared at the communication panel in disbelief. The idea that the primitives would offer him terms of surrender was so absurd that he couldn't process it at first. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed countless civilizations, and never once had an inferior enemy presumed to dictate terms to the hegemony. The transmission came through showing Admiral Morrison on the main view screen. The human leader looked tired but determined, and there was something in his eyes that made even the hardened Corvathian commander feel uneasy. Field Marshal Zethkar, this is Admiral Morrison of the Earth. Defense Fleet, I'm prepared to accept your surrender and allow your remaining forces to withdraw from human space peacefully. Zeth. Carr found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. You dare to offer me terms? Your species will be extinct within days once the full might of the hegemony arrives to avenge this defeat. Morrison's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Field Marshal, you came to our home with 17 ships and threatened to destroy everyone we care about. We've been fighting you for 6 hours with converted cargo haulers and mining equipment, and we've already destroyed more than half your fleet. He leaned forward slightly. Do you really think bringing more ships will help you? The truth of Morrison's words hit the alien commander like a physical blow. His forces had been defeated by an enemy using improvised weapons and tactics that violated every principle of modern warfare. More ships would just mean more targets for human ingenuity to destroy. Lieutenant Commander Ben Cross had spent the final hours of the battle infiltrating deeper into the Corvathian fleet, using his captured identification codes to move freely among the enemy ships. What he discovered there would change humanity's understanding of the galaxy forever. Admiral, you need to see this. Cross reported from inside an alien vessel he had boarded. I'm downloading their navigation logs and strategic databases. Sir, the hegemony isn't just one species. It's 12 different civilizations and they're all terrified of something. The data that Cross transmitted painted a picture of a galaxy ruled by fear. The Corvathian hegemony had conquered world after world not because they were inherently aggressive, but because they were running from something even more dangerous. Their rigid military doctrine and overwhelming firepower were defensive measures designed to eliminate threats before they could develop into serious challenges. Dr. Helen Murphy analyzed the alien data from her research station and made a discovery that would reshape human understanding of their place in the universe. Admiral, according to these records, every species in the hegemony was once exactly like us. They were independent, creative, unpredictable civilizations until they were conquered and forced to conform to Corvathian standards. The implications were staggering. The galaxy wasn't filled with naturally inferior species that needed to be dominated. It was filled with civilizations that had been systematically crushed and rebuilt in the image of their conquerors. Morrison realized that humanity had just won more than a battle. They had proven that the hegemony's model of civilization was not inevitable, that creativity and independence could triumph over conformity and overwhelming force. Tony Clark and his team of hackers had been busy during the final phase of the battle, infiltrating Corvathian communication networks and spreading word of humanity's victory throughout the galaxy. The news traveled faster than light through alien communication relays, reaching every world in the hegemony within hours. The psychological impact was devastating to alien morale and inspiring to conquered species that had almost forgotten what freedom looked like. Rebellions began erupting on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries as populations, that had been suppressed for generations suddenly remembered that resistance was possible. Field Marshal Zethkar made the hardest decision of his military career when he realized that continuing to fight would only result in the complete destruction of his fleet. The humans had proven they could turn any object in space into a weapon, and any moment of confusion into an opportunity for attack. All Corvathian vessels. This is Field Marshal Zethkar, he announced on his fleet communication channel. We are withdrawing from this system immediately. Do not engage human forces unless directly attacked. The alien fleet began its retreat, but even this became a nightmare as human forces had anticipated every logical escape route and placed obstacles along each path. Mines disguised as asteroids, automated weapon platforms hidden in debris fields, and decoy signals that led ships into dead ends turned the withdrawal into another lesson in human tactical creativity. Morrison watched the alien fleet limping away from Earth and realized that this victory was just the beginning. Humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy in the most dramatic way possible, and there would be consequences that reached far beyond the solar system. The final transmission came from General Hayes on Earth. Jake, preliminary reports are coming in from across the galaxy. It looks like our little demonstration has inspired some reactions we didn't expect. Half the hegemony appears to be in revolt. Morrison smiled as he looked out at the stars that no longer seemed cold and distant. Humanity had passed its first test as a spacefaring species, not by proving they were the strongest or most advanced civilization in the galaxy, but by proving they were the most dangerous thing any rigid, predictable enemy could face, a species that refused to accept that anything was truly impossible.